Hello and welcome to the De-Stress podcast with me, Dr. Amanda. This is a podcast that I've had an idea for a little while, and I'm really excited to finally be launching it and sharing it with you all. Thank you so much to everyone that is listening, and I really hope that you subscribe and follow along for some of these really wonderful episodes that I have coming. So, like I said, I'm Dr. Amanda. I am a GP and a lifestyle medicine expert. And one of the main pillars of lifestyle medicine is stress management. Stress is something that isn't really avoidable in everyday life. Whether it's come from different relationships, whether it's from work, whether it's from children, or from so many different angles, we can actually experience stress. And it's not something that we can completely get rid of, but it is something that we can manage. I think a lot of the time, the impact that stress has on our health and our life, our mental health, physical health, and our life in general is really underestimated. There are so many people that I see in my practice as a GP that are struggling with so many different conditions, and they are searching for answers to why they're feeling so unwell. All the tests come back as normal, but a lot of the time it's because of stress. Stress is not just a mental illness or a mental problem. It's something that has physical impacts as well. It changes so many parts of how our body runs, and it's really important that we are aware of it, that we understand it, and we know how to manage it. And that is what this podcast is all about. Come over here to learn some ways to de-stress. I'll be speaking with experts in different areas, whether it's from nutrition to physical activity to therapy, to sleep. I'll be talking with experts in those fields that can give you some really practical advice. But also, so many of us in our everyday life experience stress. And so I'll be speaking with some really amazing people about their own stories with stress, how they experience stress, and deal with some very common stressful situations. And they can give us their tips on how they mitigate for it and enjoy life at the same time. So thank you once again for following along. This first episode, I'm really excited to tell you, is I am joined by a guest. I'm joined by an amazing therapist and counsellor, trauma expert called Joanna Daniel. She's going to be here for not just this episode, but our next episode as well. But in this first episode, we both share with you our stress story, how we actually both ended up experiencing toxic stress, and how we have tried to change our lives completely so that we can manage with things even despite some of the stresses that come in. So I really hope that you enjoy. And if you do enjoy this episode, like I said, please subscribe. You can find us on YouTube at Life with Dr. Amanda, or on podcast platforms, Spotify and Apple Podcasts, under De-Stressed with Dr. Amanda. You can also follow me on Instagram at Life with Dr. Amanda as well. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the episode. So hello, everyone. Like I said, today we have a very special guest for our first episode of the De-Stress podcast. And our guest is Joanna Daniel. Thank you so much for joining us today, Joanna. I'm really excited for the conversation that we're about to have, because we've been having some great ones on your podcast beforehand, and also just on the phone and things. And so I will start off by letting you introduce yourself, and then we can get into the meat of it.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. It's a pleasure to be here. So as Amanda said, my name is Joanna Daniel. I'm a trauma-informed counselor, speaker, and author. And I am a founder of Wounds to Scars, where we work with adult survivors of childhood trauma and women who experience abuse. And we do that through conferences, courses, and that provides a safe space for people to heal. And I'm the host of the Stories That Shape Us with Joanna Daniel podcast.
Brilliant. And I've got to say, I'm just so excited that you're my first guest on here, because when I think back along my journey, and right now I feel like a lot of the changes that have happened in my life came after I became a mother. And so those of you who don't know, I know Joanna personally. When I was at medical school in Leeds, we met through church. You were on the members at Leeds Central Church, Seventh-day Adventist Church. And you were just so kind to me. I feel like you really looked after me. One of the years I had a house that was a house share just a street away from yours. And I remember you and your husband would bake bread and invite me over and just be so kind and so loving. And I used to watch you, how you parented and how you were with your children. I know you have 3 children, twins, twin girl and boy, and then another son. And
Yes.
yeah, I was always in awe of how you did it. I was just in awe of your temperament, how you spoke to your children. I was just amazed by it all. And now that I've become a mother as well, a lot of those experiences, like seeing how other people did things growing up, and you, one of them, has really started to like shape some of my motherhood journey. So I'm really excited to have you.
Oh, thank you, Amanda. You know what? We don't always look back on those days and go, I was an amazing parent. You look back and go, oh my gosh, why did I do that day?
Mm-hmm.
We're always kind of looking back, looking at, as the brain does, as a preference for negativity. So I look back at the days when I wasn't so great and
Mm-hmm.
what I could have done differently. But thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Well, today's podcast, as you know, this podcast is all about
Mm,
stress and actually looking at highlighting the impact that stress has on our health, on our lives, on our family, and not just looking at the impact, but actually giving us practical solutions to manage our stress. It's not about stress avoidance because life can
mm,
be stressful. And we
mm,
know that stress comes into life, it's inevitable, especially when you're growing, you're adding people, and, just with the evolution
mm.
of life. But we need to know how to manage it so that stress doesn't break us. And so
Yeah.
that's the purpose of this. This is a 2-part podcast today, and Joanna's going to be joining me for another episode. But first, we wanted to really share with you what our stress stories have been. And both of us have gone through a bit of a realization to personally discover how impactful it is when you have stress in your life. And although we're going to be giving you lots of tips, I think to actually share with you and be a bit vulnerable, explain what it has been like, our stress stories, what it's been like dealing with stress.
Yeah. Certainly. I was talking to a friend this morning. She's also a therapist and she works with children. And I was saying, I'm tired. I think I'm tired and I don't have a lot of clients, but I think I'm going to even reduce it a little bit more and take some time out. It's so important for us to be able to listen to our bodies and respond. I've had to learn the hard way to
Yes.
listen and not listen to my body and respond. I remember my friend said to me, dear friend, she said to me, Joanna, you need to learn to leave the house dirty and just lie on your back and relax. And I was horrified. I'm just like, how do you do that? How do you do that? I thought. But then I had to learn to do it. And I said to women, now do it before you have to do it. Learn
Yes.
how to do it before you have to do it. Because as much as I know about stress and toxic stress, I never thought it would happen to me because I thought I was managing, right? I
Mm-hmm.
just thought, but there's so many things that in the background that leads us to make decisions that results in stress that we're not realizing. And it's I call this the batteries, the apps that are running in the background. When you have mobile phone, you
Yes.
charge it and you go, oh, but
Mm-hmm.
I was full charge. Why is it dead? Because there were some apps running in the background. And so some of the apps that was running in the background is trauma responses
Mm-hmm.
and decisions and promises that you made to yourself when you were small that you're carrying out subconsciously and you don't
Yeah.
even know that you're doing it. And I think that was the catalyst for some of my stress because of that background noise that I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't hear because I wasn't allowing myself to hear and to tap into and to understand what it was doing.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's a great place to start because that's where my stress story starts.
Mm,
The aim of this podcast and these conversations is that if you've gone through toxic stress and now you're trying to never go back there again, this podcast is for you. But it's also to stop people having to go through the toxic stress
mm,
so that you don't have to, you can learn the lessons through us rather than having to experience them always yourself. And so what you talked about, those expectations from childhood that you kind of carry with you. And I'm
mm.
somebody who I've always been described as a very caring person. I'm always someone that really wants to please people. And I
Uh,
grew up wanting to please, like my grandparents, wanting to please my parents, wanting to be able to say yes to everything all the time. And
mm,
so I had this like perfectionist thing. I remember when I think I was about 6 or 7 when I started saying that I wanted to be a doctor. And my parents, they're amazing. They would push me towards that and help me with that. But then I got to the point when I was in my teenage time, I was like, I don't know if I can be a doctor. I was like, no, I need to carry on with it because I've said this and it's what everyone's expecting. So I need to keep on going. And in the end, yes, I'm happy that I'm a doctor, but that kind of pressure I've always put on myself. And
Mm.
so, yes. So I guess where my stress story starts is that was my background. And I went to medical school. I became a doctor. Fine. I met my husband whilst in medical school. We got married a month after I finished and became a doctor. Brilliant. Everything was going well. And I was taking on lots of responsibilities. So I was a new wife. We moved, like relocated. We I was working around the clock. I was doing lots of locums. I was doing lots of shifts anyway, because as a junior doctor, you work a lot. But
Yeah.
also, me and my husband really wanted to travel. And, he was studying at the time. I was like, okay, so I'll just work more, get more money so we can travel and we can do this. And I want you to be able to have your study protected like I was able to have, that my parents provided for me. And so I just had all these pressures on me to do this. But I was managing, even with that background stress, because I still had a lot of time to look after myself. So yes, I would travel with my husband. I would like go to the gym. I'd sleep really well. I've always been an excellent sleeper. I never had to be told to go to bed early, 10 o'clock, even at university, even when everyone's doing fun things, I would be in bed at 10 and I'll be up at 6. That's just how I was. And so I never struggled with sleep. I made sure that I fueled my body. I'm no more now, so I could have fueled it a bit better, but I made sure that I fed myself, and I did enjoyable things. I met with my family and I had like really good relationships. And then it got to 2019 when I became pregnant with my daughter. I planned pregnancy, I plan everything.
Yeah.
And I was, the pregnancy was fine. And she was born, excellent. Then we went into the pandemic and I was locked down and I was seeing lots of things like Black Lives Matter and health disparities. And I was like evolving into this new mother. And I just took on loads of these things and it just became like these burdens on my mind. And I said to myself, I need to do something about this. I feel like the answer to all these health disparities between ethnic groups was because there wasn't enough education. So I decided to make my own online platform called Life with Dr. Amanda, which is this like a little part of that. And then I returned to work. So I had a 1-year-old, I returned to work and I started this online platform. And because I have this background of pleasing people and saying yes to everything, the opportunities started coming in at work for me to do COVID vaccines and do webinars and do things on the weekend and pop-up clinics and this and that. And I was saying yes to everything like I did before, putting that pressure on me before, but things were completely different now. I had a child. I couldn't look after myself the way that I used to. And I quickly started to burn out. Quickly started to burn out and started feeling low and anxious and things that I never felt before. And I kept thinking, I just need a break. I had 2 weeks of annual leave. And at 2 weeks of annual leave, I couldn't get out of bed. I was like, what is wrong with me? I just had no energy. Like I could kind of get myself going for my daughter, but I just had no energy otherwise. Like, what is this? I thought I needed a break, but this break is just telling me I'm more tired. And then I finished my GP training and then I found a new job. And again, I'm not listening to all these things. I've got all this stress going on, all these activities that I'm doing, trying to be this mother that I've always dreamed of being. And I'm not listening to my body and the stress levels are going up. I start a new job and it's a job at a practice that is a really demanding practice. And rather than choosing a job that might suit my lifestyle a bit more, I just went full throttle at it and I started burning out again after a couple of months. And then I fell pregnant with my second child. And my body just became the hormones of it, being pregnant with a toddler, working at the level that I was working this time because I was out of training now compared to before. The stress just kept building and building. I started becoming extremely anxious and I became sick whilst I was pregnant, vomiting a lot, and just really struggling there. And so once I started really struggling with that, I had to take some time off work because I was vomiting so much. I took about a week off. Then I came back with a phase return. And when I came back to work, my workplace was not supportive at all. They wanted to put me back onto probation because I took some sick leave, even though it's all pregnancy related. And just the whole system started to change. And I felt very anxious, very paranoid. And I found myself having panic attacks whilst I was at work, nobody really interacting with me, not getting the support that I needed at work. I didn't have a pregnancy risk assessment. And I just felt like I was being scrutinized. Anyway, that was a few months. That took a couple of months. I was doing that, just really struggling at work and not really taking. I just thought it's hormones, or I just need to work harder, is what I told myself. Not looking into the amount of stress that I was under, just thinking I just need to power through. And then it came to the new year, and I was called in by one of my bosses that they had some concerns about my work. And they presented to me in this meeting that I was told was an informal meeting. They presented to me a list of errors they think I had been making. So forgetting to like send a prescription to the pharmacy, forgetting to send a task to the secretary. And there wasn't any harm to any patients, but they were like, something's not right. You weren't like this before. What's going on? And in that meeting, I told them about how much I'd been struggling. And they said that they wanted to support me and that I shouldn't be so hard on myself. So I was really quite devastated. And from that, I took some time off. I took 4 weeks off work. During that 4 weeks, work escalated things. I don't know why. I think it's because they didn't like that I was pregnant. And they said that if I return to work and I make another mistake, they will be referring me to the governing body, to the people that
Oh,
hold my medical
wow.
license. And I was
Oh,
like, what?
wow.
Like nothing had happened in that meeting. It was sounded like a very supportive meeting.
Yeah.
There was to be no patient harm. I took some time off sick to protect myself and to protect my patients foremost. And then I came with this email. And so I said, you know what, there's not enough support there. I'm just going to go on to early maternity leave. They wanted me to provide a document with reflections on the mistakes that I made. And so because of the emails I was getting, I decided to reach out to like my medical insurance to help me write these reflections and just make sure I was safe. So I did all that, and I had no contact with that workplace from the day that I left after that meeting. I hadn't, apart from some emails back and forth about maternity leave, no phone calls, no well-being check.
Nobody checked in on you.
Nothing. No one checked in on me. I would just get emails saying, where are your reflections? Here is your maternity pay. Nothing about how's the pregnancy, how's the baby, nothing. And then the week before I was due to give birth, this whole time I was trying to recover from this anxiety and everything that I've been going through in the pregnancy. I get an email from the governing body, the people that hold my medical license, the GMC, saying that my employer had referred me to them.
While you were on maternity leave?
Yes. And this was 3 months after I'd even stepped foot in the building. No further mistakes had been made, but they referred me to them. And that was the week before I gave birth. On my due date, I had to attend a tribunal about what would happen to my medical license while they investigated things. And I was told that I was going to be on 12 months of restrictions, where if I chose to go back to work on maternity leave, I would have to be supervised. And I knew that I couldn't go back to that workplace. And I was left in a position of having to find a new job whilst on maternity leave, having to resign. And it was just, I was full. The stress was full. And I buried my head in the sand for a few months because I gave birth maybe 2 days later after that tribunal, I think. And I just wanted to concentrate on my family. And so I kind of just tried to put everything to the back of my mind. But August last year, I had to start facing it all again when my daughter was 3 months old. And the stress of having to find work when you have restrictions, having to have investigations against you. It was just so much. And the stress had me, I wasn't able to sleep well. I felt my body just, just headaches all the time, so much back pain and hip pain. Some days I couldn't even walk, feeling nauseous all the time and just not feeling like I could even hear people. Like my husband would talk to me about his day and it's like I couldn't even take in the information. I was just completely at capacity. And so I've been on this journey to try and get myself down from this level of stress. Yes, there's a lot of practical things I've had to do in terms of finding new work and getting my license cleared up. But I've been trying to get to a point where I don't ever go back to that, because although the workplace wasn't supportive, the reason why I dealt with it so badly and why I struggled with it was because of all the stress and the way that I'd been living life before. I never addressed it. And then the toxic stress came and just pushed me over the edge.
Tip things over. And I do this demonstration, where there's and sometimes I always, when I'm doing it with a client, I always look around to see if I have anything near me. Like stress is like, if you consider like a bottle, and if it's full, and anything small or large can come and tip it over. It runs over. So what we want to do is have holes, I call it, in that container that will make it never full. It will never, and those are outlets that we have. things that we do, we practice physically and mental things that we practice that ensures that we're not running over ever. But we don't always think like that, because as women, sometimes as Black women,
Mhm.
there's this pressure to be,
Yes.
and even though I plan to not do it, but it's such a habit that you
Hmm.
do it. And
Yes.
of course, there are many other, as I said, the underlying things that drives you to do that. But I'm glad that that was cleared up for you at work.
Hmm. Yes, and just so you know, the end of the story, to everyone listening, it is now nearly a year actually. My daughter's 1 next month. So it's
Okay.
nearly a year to when I was referred, to when everything was happening. And I have the GMC, my governing body that hold medical license. I did a 2-day assessment where they found that there was no deficiencies in my knowledge or my practice as a doctor. They reviewed all of my notes at my old workplace and they said there was no deficiencies. And they basically wrote to me and said, this should have been dealt with locally, you shouldn't be referred. It has been revoked. And so now my license is completely clear. I found a new job, which is so much like, I didn't even know a practice and a boss, an employer like this existed. And it's really
Wow.
supportive practice. I've also been offered 2 other jobs that I can do from home remotely and on hours that I choose. And so now I'm at a point where I'm got a much more balance. I'm at home a lot more with the children. I've got a job that's more supportive and fulfilling. And I'm actually like, a lot of this affected my income because I had no work for a while.
Of
And
course.
I'm actually at the point now where I'm earning more than I was at the old practice. And I always say that God, when he brings you through something, he doesn't just restore, he makes things better.
Yes.
And so I feel like I'm in a much better position now. And because of what I went through, it's meant that I was on a track before this happened. I was on a track of becoming, I don't know what, but I was on a road of like career driven and goal driven and not really looking at the wider picture of my life.
Mhm, mhm.
I was on a stress track. And now, even though
Mm.
I don't appreciate I wish that I never went through what I went through. Um, it's helped me, and
Yeah.
that's why I wanted to do this, so I can help others with what I've learned. I've learned things through mentorship and through therapy, which we'll talk about soon.
Mm.
I've learned things about my diet and my sleep and my physical activity and just how to mitigate for toxic stress and reducing the burden and the way that it can, and be able to thrive in a stressful environment, which life can be sometimes.
Yeah, I mean that's so amazing that they put you through that. When I was pregnant with the twins, I had something similar, not as intense, but I had to take the first 2 months off. The first 2 months I had to take off because the world just, as soon as you open your eyes, the world spins. It just
Yeah.
never ever settles. So, and they sent me to occupational therapy because they wanted to fire me because of that time off, but they couldn't fire me because I was
Mm.
pregnant. They sent me to occupational therapy, and God made me see a woman that had similar pregnancy to mine. She was so upset. She was furious. She wrote this letter, right? That says, did you know she could sue you? I said to the regional manager, can I have a copy of the letter? She was like, it wasn't my fault. It wasn't me. So nobody wanted to take responsibility for it. But a stress like that, when you're pregnant, it just adds to it because the
Yeah.
hormones are all over the place anyway. So it's so awful that employers can put people through that. And sometimes it's
Mhm.
women leading the charge when
Oh
when that
yeah.
happens, awful people. But for those who are listening, what we're saying is that stress can come from many different places. And
Yes.
that we must leave room, because that's what you said, Amanda, capacity. We're at capacity. We must leave
Mhm.
room for space for our bodies to be able to manage. So for me, there was no one single event. There's no
Yeah.
one single toxic stress event. I think it was just a building over time because of those things that were running in the background,
Mhm.
um, that pushed me to want to do everything. So I knew I was going to homeschool my children before I was married and had any,
Okay.
because I heard a research that Black boys underachieve in the system from kindergarten. And I said, babies can't underachieve. So there's
Yeah.
a problem with the system. And I made a decision then. I was training as a social worker, and I made the decision that my children would not go. So that's before I was
Mm.
married. So here I'm married, and within the first year of marriage, I was pregnant, and I had a boy. We had the twins, and I knew that I wasn't going to send them to school. So, I mean, that's a lot of sacrifice already. But I was
Yeah.
also, I remember when I was pregnant with the twins, I had this counselor because I was also training as a counselor. I had this counselor, and I was telling her all these things I was doing. And she's this amazing woman. And I remember she saying, but, basically wanted me to reflect on whether or not I could do all of that. And I looked at her like, of course I can. I wish she was more directive. She was person centered.
Yes.
And I'm not a person centered counselor. I use person centered to underpin my work because relationship with my clients is important to me. But I'm directive. I'm challenging. I wish she was like, Joanna, you can't do that, right? But
Yes.
she didn't. She wanted me to think, and I'm thinking like, with my old mindset going, she think I can't do it. I'm gonna do it.
Yeah, I'll show her.
So that's what I did. And I am homeschooling. I was practice teaching. Then we moved to Wales. This is where the counseling practice started building. And the children are growing, the demands are more, and I'm building this thing that I have no idea how to build. I've never seen anybody run a business. I've never seen anybody run an online business. I'm learning all of this. I'm staying up late, attending webinars and marketing events and this and that and the learning, doing, traveling to speak for months at a time. I'd come home on a Sunday and leave on a Friday with my poor kids with me, my family with me, some very rarely on my own. So, and when you go speak, there are people
Wow.
that are drawing from you. And I'm an introvert. So I'm not a natural speaker. I'm naturally one to hide in the back. So when I'm comfortable with somebody one-to-one, I can. But traveling to speak and people are coming to speak to me, that pulls
That
from
was
me.
draining, yeah.
That was draining, and I wasn't aware of how draining. So that kept going and kept going, and I started getting ill. And I remember saying to my husband, I'm tired and I'm ill and I can't keep going. I wanted to, at this point, perhaps send the kids to school, but knowing what I know, I couldn't make myself do it. But it came to a head in 2018 when I was ill and I had to go do a scan at the hospital. And sitting in that room with the pink slip, it just hit me like, you're ill. And my son prayed at the time when I was going that it wouldn't be anything nasty. And I thought, bless him, he was about 10. I went and the lady, she scanned me and she says, your GP will call you in 2 weeks. My GP rang me the next day. I thought, that's it, I'm gonna die.
Yeah. Oh
I'm
no.
gonna die. So I drove, panicked for my sisters, talked to my husband, drove to this appointment for the GP. They did some blood tests and they rang me back a couple of days later. They were testing for ovarian cancer because that's what the symptoms I was showing. I'm glad they probably didn't tell me before. But I had this continuous problem. And my friend came to visit and she said to my husband, Joanna is stressed. Hit me like, I'm like,
wow.
I never
Of
thought of
course.
it. I never thought of that. Of course I am. I've been saying I'm tired for years. And so I remember this Sabbath, my husband and I, we didn't go to church. My friend was down and she took the children. I had to go to A&E that day. And we just drove. My favorite thing to do is to sit by the sea and watch the waves. So we drove to the pier in Pembrokeshire and I just felt my body relaxed. And I thought, I have to fix things. I have to fix things. And fixing things is not a overnight thing. It's a process. It's learning. But I knew that I didn't want this problem continuing.
Yeah,
This physical problem I was having, I didn't want it continuing. And so just slowly started. There were times when for a week I'd be in bed. My husband would juice and do all the things and pray by my bedside. My children one time said, Mom, are you going to die? That's all that it got. And just had to.
Gosh, I'm just thinking about my child asking me that.
It was awful. So I laid there and, the pandemic was a blessing in many, 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 many ways. And although I worked a lot during the pandemic because a lot of people were stressed and pressured,
yes,
I protected myself by not listening to the videos, by not watching anything. I tell people not to send anything to me. I threatened to block people if they kept doing it.
Good.
And I did have to block a few. But I'm just like, I need space to process what people are bringing into therapy. So I kept myself manage. So my husband was home. I walked a lot, just walk. And I'd sit in the garden and just sit and just watch the trees for ages. And, with everything else, with nutrition, we've always had good nutrition anyway, with, juicing and things like that. So, no one thing is going to help you manage stress in your body. It's a combination of things. So though
Yes.
we've always been plant-based, that didn't help stress. And though I had trust in God, the stress came. So it's a combination of things that we have to manage. And one of the things I had to get rid of, Amanda, was the expectations and the pressures that I put on myself and free myself. So I had to process my shame story. Like the shame
Yes.
story was keeping me, the shame story that happened when I was 11 was keeping me doing on this treadmill that was making me ill and could have taken me from my children. And I just couldn't have it anymore. So when that realization came, when my friend said, Joanna, I stress, I'm a reflector. So I started going back, like, why? Going through all the things. And of course, the work continues. So
Yeah. Just awesome, because you told me this story. You told me about what had happened on one of our calls, and I was just I felt speechless. I felt so inspired because I'm at the point now where I've discovered that I'm stressed. I want to change things, but but changing things, that producing habits don't just come overnight. And
no,
making new connections in my brain and retraining myself to do these things. When I hear you talk about just going walking and sitting and looking at the trees and sitting by the ocean. And yesterday I saw you post some stories and where you were walking, you were saying that you were just having such a good time, just walking in the park, sitting down, walking a bit more. And I was like, this is what I need. I need space. And when we talk about, that analogy you gave of the bottle and make sure there's holes in there so it never
yeah,
gets
yeah,
full.
yeah.
That is exactly what it's just such a beautiful analogy. I want to be at the point where I'm so used to filling myself up to 100% and like working off that and just hoping things balance out. And then when something comes in, I'm like, oh.
No.
And so I'm trying to get myself down to like
Yeah,
running off 70%, 75, like running lower. So when things come in, yes, things might feel a bit full, but I don't feel overwhelmed. I don't feel like I'm spilling over. And
that's
it's just
it.
beautiful that you've gone on this journey. And yet you've got to be so intentional
Yeah,
about things for things not to all just completely affect you. Yes, you were plant-based. Yes, you trusted in God, but you were still allowing, things from your past, the trauma, the shame story, all those things to be there on your mind and taking on things that weren't part of your personality. You said you're an
yeah.
introvert and doing things that are draining you, but carry on doing it.
That's it. But that's what the stories do. And that's why my podcast is stories that shape us, because those stories that we experience shape, it dictates your life and you don't know that it's dictating your life. Why am I a perfectionist? I'm not a perfectionist, by the way, but when we are, why was I doing so many things? I was doing so many things to prove to myself that I could,
Yes.
because the shame story is I didn't. And so the story that we tell ourselves influence. So like, who am I doing this for? So I made a decision, I think it was 2018 when that happened, that okay, you know how people focus on a word for the year or whatever. I'm like, okay, I don't have
Yeah.
a word for the year, but I'm gonna make relationships important to me. I'm gonna be intentional about relationships. And so the relationships that are important to me, I started making sure that I nurture them. I call people, I text them, I check in with them. I make sure I think about my relationship with my husband. What do I want that to be? I don't just want to be married. I want to be happily married. That takes
Yes.
work. So I'm like, I'm going to do the work because, mate, we're not going to exist in this house as just friends. All right.
Yeah.
I want to like you still.
Yes.
So that takes work and being intentional. Being intentional. Connection is my highest value with my children. So I'm going to work at connecting. So I can't be doing all of that and then doing all the things to all the
Yes.
people. So it narrows it down. And then my spiritual life is important to me. So my group of friends is very small, and I keep it small. Not that I'm not opposed to meeting other people. I'm introvert anyway. You know how they say
Yeah.
extroverts adopts introverts. So So that's how it works. So the group is small anyway. And I find that as we're all women and they're amazing women, we're healing, we're learning about ourselves, we're learning about how we did relationships, we're trying, we're doing new things, and the friendships are deepening.
Yes.
And I prefer deep relationships versus surface connection, you know. So
Absolutely.
if we go back to the bottle analogy, so there's this story about putting in the big rocks first,
Yes.
because if you put in the unimportant things, then the big things won't fit. And so the big things have to go in first and anything else that is left over. So I don't take a position at church. I
Yeah.
don't have the space for it, but I will help when I can because I have a ministry that I run, which is important. So the big things have to be in first. I won't
Yeah.
take a call after a certain time because unless it's like an emergency and I'm like, I'm not an emergency service, so I can't take a call at this time. So they're very different things that I had to be intentional about.
Yes.
And old habits die hard, Amanda. So
Uh-huh.
then it's practicing these things until they become so ingrained that I'm doing them automatically. Some of them anyway. So like walking, my body will tell me go, and I have to.
Yeah.
I
And
have to
that's the
go.
thing, I'm at the point now where I'm not, I know what the rocks are that need to
Yes.
be there because I've spent time looking at that. I've cut out a lot of things, but it's making sure that those rocks stay in the bottle and I don't allow those to. So I've
Yes.
said things, things out of my rock are things like, yes, my family, yes, my relationship with God, yes, my husband and my children, everything, but also it's the other relationships too. I had
Yes.
so much guilt when I was really burnt out that I wasn't keeping up with my grandparents. I really did. And I found that mental load of feeling that guilt and everything of not having that family tie. And for me, that was really important. And so that is something that needs to be in my bottle. And seeing what's how to make that space, because there's other things that I'm doing that don't need to be there. But also like physical activity and eating right are things that if I'm starting to feel a bit at capacity, those things will start to go out the window.
Yeah.
I'll spend the day. I won't eat anything all day. I won't.
Oh
I won't
no.
go on the walk that I want to go. Honestly, those are
Oh
things, and
no,
this is
you
what I'm
can't
being
do that.
intentional.
You can't do that. When I was listening to you talk about your grandparents and your children and all the things, I don't know if you've read the book by James Clear called Atomic Habits. It's brilliant.
Yes.
And he talks about habit stacking. And as I was listening, I'm thinking, oh, you could habit stack with grandparents, children, walk. You know, like
Yeah.
three
Yeah.
in one day, and not it's not a tick box exercise, but you're spending quality time with them, with the children, doing something that you like and need to do,
Yes.
and that gets done.
Yeah, no, exactly. But thank you so much for joining me on this first episode. I really hope you guys have taken something from that. The main thing is that we all have stress come from anywhere. It really can. It doesn't have to be a terrible work environment. It doesn't have to be taking on too many speaking engagements and not listening to your introverted self. It doesn't have to be that, but it can affect you. It can affect anybody, even if you're appearing to be very successful. And understanding your stress story, understanding where your stress came from can help you to move forward and prioritize the right things. I hope you guys all keep in your mind that analogy of the bottle. Make sure there's holes there so it never gets full. That's what I'm taking from this conversation today. We are going to be back next week for another episode where we're going to be talking about therapy, because therapy is one of the things that keeps holes in my bottle. And made me more aware of where I was and more accountable in what I'm doing. And so we're going to talk about that next week. So please come back and listen. But before we leave, thank you again, Joanna, for joining me. And I know you've mentioned some of the places that we can find you, but just reiterate again where everyone can find you. I want to say, please listen to a podcast, Stories That Shape Us with Joanna Daniel. Is that right? Yes. Because I've been listening every day for the last couple of weeks. And this morning it might have been yesterday's one, but you talked about being honest, telling the truth when you speak, telling the truth. And that's what's helping with relationships. But yeah, so listen to the podcast. If you can see today, she gives so many gems. It's such an enjoyable time speaking with you. So yeah, but tell the audience where we can find you.
Thank you, Amanda. So you can find me on YouTube on Wounds to Scars, on Facebook at Wounds to Scars, on Instagram at Wounds to Scars 1, and on Spotify and Apple with Stories That Shape Us with Joanna Daniel. So that's where you'll find me.
Brilliant. And so I'll see you all next week.